Ladies and gentlemen, today we delve into one of the most profound and transformative aspects of the spiritual journey. There is a path, often misunderstood and rarely walked, which requires resilience, faith, and a heart that is unyielding in pursuit of the divine calling. The greatest spiritual warriors in history have faced unimaginable tests, challenges so immense that only the strongest are chosen to endure them. These trials are not for the faint-hearted, for they are the crucible that refines the soul, sharpening its character and spirit for the greater purpose that lies ahead. The 7 hardest spiritual tests are reserved for those who are destined to walk a path of greatness, and today we will explore them in depth. These tests are not just obstacles to overcome, but milestones that shape the very foundation of a person's spiritual and emotional essence. As we journey through these challenges, you will come to understand that every trial is an invitation to go deeper, to rise higher, and to be molded into the vessel that God desires for you to be. Each of these tests, though difficult, is an essential part of the preparation for what is to come. The test of isolation. Isolation is a powerful test, a challenge that many spiritual leaders have faced at various points in their lives. It is during these times of solitude that we are forced to confront our deepest fears, doubts, and insecurities. God, in His infinite wisdom, often removes us from the distractions of the world to test the depth of our relationship with Him. In isolation, we are stripped of our earthly supports, our friends, our family, and even our comforts. We are left alone to face ourselves, our thoughts, and our emotions. This isolation is not meant to punish, but to purify. In these moments, the distractions of daily life fade away and the voice of God becomes clearer. It is in solitude that the true test of faith begins. Do you still trust in God's plan when you cannot see the way forward? Do you still believe in His promises when there is no one else around to encourage you? These are the questions that isolation forces you to confront. The power of isolation is that it molds you into a person who can stand firm in the face of adversity. Someone who knows that God is enough, even when everything else is taken away. Isolation is also a test of endurance. It is easy to believe in God's plan when the world is cheering you on, when people are around you to affirm your purpose. But when you are alone, when there is no one to validate your journey, you are forced to find strength in yourself. This test teaches you the importance of inner fortitude. It reminds you that your relationship with God must be rooted in something deeper than external circumstances. It is in isolation that you discover the strength to persevere, the resilience to push through when the world around you seems silent. The test of isolation is also a time of revelation. When we are alone with God, He reveals things to us that we could never see in the noise of our busy lives. It is a time for deep spiritual growth. God can speak to us in ways that we might not understand in times of comfort. The truths that are revealed during this period are often the keys to our future success. It is during isolation that you discover your true identity, stripped of all the false labels the world has placed on you. Isolation, therefore, is not the end. It is merely a preparation. Just as a seed must be buried in the soil to grow, so too must we be placed in times of solitude to grow spiritually. The isolation is a temporary phase, but its effects are eternal. Through this test, you emerge stronger, wiser, and more in tune with the divine purpose that awaits you. Finally, the test of isolation is the test of surrender. It is a time when you must let go of your need for control, When everything around you is still, you are left with only your trust in God. The deeper your surrender, the more profound the transformation. It is in this sacred space that you begin to experience God in a way that words cannot describe. The test of betrayal. Betrayal is one of the most painful tests a spiritual person can endure. It cuts to the heart and shatters the trust that has been built over time. The pain of betrayal, whether it comes from a friend, a loved one, or a fellow believer, can feel like the deepest wound. And yet it is in this moment of profound hurt that God begins to teach us the power of forgiveness and grace. The test of betrayal forces us to confront the deepest parts of our hearts, the places where unforgiveness, resentment, and bitterness may have taken root. When someone betrays us, we are faced with the decision to either hold on to that pain and allow it to consume us, or to release it and trust in God's healing power. The test of betrayal is not simply about the actions of others. It is about how we respond to those actions. It is about learning to forgive as we have been forgiven, even when it feels impossible. Betrayal also reveals the true nature of our hearts. It exposes the places where we have placed our trust in people instead of God. When we allow ourselves to be dependent on human relationships for our sense of security, we are vulnerable to disappointment. The test of betrayal teaches us that our ultimate trust must be in God alone. It is through betrayal that we learn the profound truth that God's love and faithfulness are unwavering, even when those around us fail us. This test is also a reminder of the power of grace. When Jesus was betrayed by Judas, he chose the path of forgiveness, offering grace even in the face of deep personal hurt. This act of love and mercy serves as a powerful example for us. The test of betrayal is an opportunity to mirror the heart of Christ, to love and forgive. Furthermore, betrayal is not only a test of forgiveness, but a test of purpose. When we experience betrayal, we are often left questioning the purpose of the relationship or the situation. But God, in His sovereignty, uses even the painful moments of betrayal to redirect us towards our true calling. He takes what was meant for evil and turns it into something that advances His divine purpose in our lives. The test of betrayal is ultimately a test of trust. Can you trust God enough to release the pain and move forward in His plan? Can you trust that He will use even betrayal for your good? It is in this test that we learn to place our trust fully in God's timing and purpose, knowing that nothing can separate us from His love. The test of patience. Patience is perhaps one of the most challenging tests we will face on our spiritual journey. In a world that demands instant results and quick gratification, the ability to wait is increasingly rare. Yet patience is a virtue that is cultivated through trials, especially when the answers we seek do not come as quickly as we desire. The test of patience is a test of trust, faith, and perseverance. When we find ourselves waiting for a breakthrough, a miracle, or an answer to prayer, we are often tempted to act on our own. The test of patience asks us to trust that God's timing is perfect, even when we cannot see the full picture. It is in this space of waiting that our character is refined. Patience teaches us that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His timing is always better than our own. People, it's a miracle when our problems don't seem as unsolvable as they do. Provide perspective, provide clarity. It forces us to rely on His wisdom, knowing that He is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot yet comprehend. The test of patience also reveals the condition of our hearts. Are we content to trust in God's process, or are we impatient and anxious for things to happen on our timeline? Patience is not just about waiting. It is about waiting with a heart of faith. It is about maintaining a posture of trust, even when the circumstances around us are unclear. This test calls us to surrender our need for control and to trust that God is faithful to fulfill His promises no matter how long it takes. Moreover, patience is a test of endurance. In the midst of the waiting, we may feel discouraged, tempted to give up, or to settle for less than what God has promised. The test of patience challenges us to hold on, to press forward, even when the road ahead seems long and difficult. It is in this testing that we discover the power of perseverance. We learn that it is not enough to simply start the journey. We must also finish it. This test also teaches us to appreciate the process. In our impatience, we often overlook the lessons that can only be learned in the waiting. God uses the process to prepare us for what is to come. If we rush through the waiting, we miss the growth and transformation that take place in those moments. Patience teaches us to embrace the journey, knowing that every step is part of God's divine plan for our lives. Finally, the test of patience is a reminder of the eternal nature of God's promises. Patience requires us to look beyond the immediate and to focus on the long term. It forces us to understand that God's promises are not bound by time, but by His eternal purpose. Through patience, we learn to trust that what God has spoken will come to pass in His perfect timing. The test of obedience. Obedience is one of the foundational principles of the spiritual life. It is the willingness to follow God's commands, even when they do not make sense or when the cost seems too high. The test of obedience is a challenge that tests our willingness to surrender our will to God's. It requires us to trust that His ways are higher than ours, even when we cannot understand the reasoning behind His instructions. When God asks us to do something, it is not always easy. Sometimes His commands require us to step out of our comfort zones, to take risks, and to make sacrifices. The test of obedience forces us to confront our fears and doubts. It challenges us to trust in God's goodness, even when His instructions do not align with our own desires or understanding. Obedience is not just about following rules. It is about trusting the heart of the one who gives the commands. When we obey God, we acknowledge His sovereignty and our submission to His will. It is an act of faith, a declaration that we trust God even when we cannot see the outcome. The test of obedience is a reminder that our relationship with God is built on trust, not understanding. This test also teaches us the importance of listening. Obedience requires us to hear God's voice clearly. It is not enough to know what is right. We must also be willing to act on it. The test of obedience is about aligning our will with God's will, and this requires sensitivity to His guidance. Through this test, we develop the ability to discern God's voice in our lives. Moreover, the test of obedience is a test of sacrifice. God often asks us to give up something valuable in order to follow Him. This might be our time, our resources, or our own desires. Obedience requires us to let go of the things we hold dear in order to receive something far greater. It teaches us that obedience is not always easy, but it always leads to greater. Ultimately, the test of obedience is about trust and surrender. It is about acknowledging that God's plans are far better than our own and choosing to follow Him even when the path ahead is unclear. Through obedience, we become more like Christ, who was obedient to the Father even to the point of death. Obedience is not just a test, it is a pathway to greater spiritual maturity and alignment with God's will. The test of humility. Humility is a test that many are not prepared for, yet it is one of the most important qualities a spiritual leader can possess. Humility is not about thinking less of oneself, but thinking of oneself less. It is about recognizing that all of our gifts, talents, and abilities come from God. And it is through His grace that we are able to serve others. The test of humility often comes when we are elevated or recognized for our achievements. In these moments, we are faced with the decision to either take credit for our success or to acknowledge God's hand in our lives. Humility is a test that challenges us to stay grounded even when the world around us elevates us. It reminds us that true greatness comes from serving others, not from being served. Humility also requires us to confront our pride. Pride can easily slip into our hearts, especially when we experience success or recognition. The test of humility forces us to examine our hearts and motives. Are we doing things for our own glory, or are we doing them for God's glory? Humility is about placing God first in all things and recognizing that without Him, we are nothing. The test of humility also teaches us the importance of serving others. True humility is not just about deflecting praise. It is about actively choosing to serve and put others above ourselves. Jesus, the ultimate example of humility, washed the feet of His disciples, demonstrating that no task is too small or beneath us. The test of humility challenges us to serve others with a pure heart, knowing that in doing so we are serving God. This test also requires us to let go of our need for recognition. In a world that values status and position, humility calls us to live differently. It calls us to embrace a life of obscurity and simplicity, trusting that God sees our actions even when no one else does. Humility is not about seeking praise or attention. It is about living in a way that brings honor to God, whether or not anyone notices. Finally, the test of humility teaches us that true power lies in surrender. When we humble ourselves, we make room for God to move in and through us. Humility is the key that unlocks the door to divine favor. Through this test, we learn that greatness in God's kingdom is not about power or position, but about serving others with love and grace. The test of faith. Faith is the foundation of the Christian life. It is by faith that we are saved, and it is by faith that we live each day. The test of faith comes when we are asked to trust God in the face of uncertainty, to believe in His promises even when the circumstances seem contrary. This test stretches us and challenges us to lean into the unseen and trust God beyond what we can understand. Faith is not just a mental assent, it is a deep-rooted trust in God's character and promises. The test of faith often comes in the form of challenges that seem insurmountable. When faced with trials, we are forced to either trust God or doubt Him. The test of faith calls us to believe that God is who He says He is, even when everything around us suggests otherwise within. The test of faith also exposes the limitations of our own understanding. We are often tempted to rely on our own wisdom and strength, but faith requires us to let go of control and trust in God's infinite wisdom. This test teaches us that God's ways are higher than ours and His timing is perfect. Faith challenges us to let go of our fears and step out into the unknown, trusting that God will guide us. Moreover, the test of faith reveals the depth of our dependence on God. When everything is going well, it is easy to believe that we are in control. But faith teaches us that we are utterly dependent on God's grace and provision. The test of faith forces us to confront our self-sufficiency and place our trust fully in God, knowing that He will provide all that we need. Faith is also a test of perseverance. The challenges we face often require us to hold on to faith for an extended period. It is easy to believe when things are going well, but it takes real faith to continue trusting when we are in the midst of a storm. The test of faith requires us to endure and keep believing, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. Finally, the test of faith is a reminder that faith is not about seeing the answer, but about trusting in God's goodness. Even when we do not see the way forward, faith allows us to rest in the assurance that God is in control. Through this test, we learn that faith is not about understanding everything, but about trusting in the one who knows all things. The test of love. Love is the greatest commandment, and yet it is one of the most challenging tests we will face on our spiritual journey. To love others as Christ loves us is no small task. The test of love comes when we are called to forgive, to serve, and to sacrifice for others, even when they do not deserve it. It is a test that challenges us to live out the unconditional love that God has shown us. The test of love forces us to confront the limitations of our own love. Human love is often conditional, based on what we can gain from others, but God's love is unconditional. It is a love that gives without expecting anything in return. The test of love challenges us to love others in the same way, even when it is difficult. It calls us to lay down our preferences, our desires, and our rights in order to serve and love those around us. This test also challenges our ability to love those who hurt us. Love is easy when it is reciprocated, but it is much harder when we are rejected or mistreated. The test of love calls us to forgive those who have wronged us, to extend grace to those who do not deserve it. In this test, we are reminded of the depth of God's love for us, even when we were undeserving of His grace. The test of love also teaches us the power of selflessness. Love is not about what we can get, but about what we can give. It is about putting others' needs above our own, about serving without expecting anything in return. The test of love challenges us to live beyond our own desires and to seek the good of others. Furthermore, the test of love requires us to love beyond our comfort zones. It is easy to love those who are like us, but true love requires us to love those who are different, those who challenge us, and even those who oppose us. This test teaches us that love knows no boundaries. It transcends race, nationality, status, and circumstance. Lastly, the test of love is the ultimate test of our spiritual maturity. To love as Christ loves is the highest calling we can aspire to. It is through this test that we become more like Him, reflecting His love to a broken world. Love is the mark of true discipleship, and it is through this test that we show the world who we belong to. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey of spiritual growth is not for the faint-hearted. It is a path marked by trials and tests, each one designed to refine, mold, and shape us into the vessels that God has called us to be. The tests we face, be it isolation, betrayal, patience, obedience, humility, faith, or love, are not punishments, but opportunities for transformation. They are the divine tools that God uses to equip us for the great work He has prepared for us. Each test is a step towards greater spiritual maturity, deeper faith, and more profound love. And as we face these tests, we can take comfort in the fact that we are not alone. God in His mercy walks with us through every challenge. He strengthens us, comforts us, and equips us to endure. Remember, it is not the absence of trials that determines our spiritual growth, but our response to them. The chosen ones are those who endure, who stand firm in their faith, who love beyond measure, and who trust God even in the darkest of times. Through these tests, we are made into the men and women God has called us to be. So, stand firm, stay faithful, and trust that every test you face is part of God's greater purpose for your life.